The massive auditorium of Ireland's Got Talent glowed with a mixture of excitement and tension as the next contestant's name was announced. The audience expected another loud, confident performer, but instead, a very small, fragile-looking boy stepped out from behind the curtains. His clothes were simple, faded from too many washes, too many days under the Cebu sun. His slippers were worn thin, the kind you buy from a street vendor for a few coins, and they slapped softly against the glossy stage floor with each hesitant step he took. His name was Eli, only 13, and his entire body seemed to tremble, not from cold, but from a lifetime of hardship that followed him like a shadow. The judges stared, unsure of what to expect. Amanda leaned forward first, her eyes softening the moment she saw him. Brian, the toughest and most logical of the judges, sat up straighter, his expression unreadable but not unkind. The third judge exchanged a quick look with them both, silently asking the same question: can this child really handle a world stage? Eli reached the center of the stage and gripped the microphone as if it were the only thing giving him the courage to stand. His voice was barely audible when he introduced himself. "My name is Eli. I'm from Cebu City, from the Philippines." He swallowed hard before continuing. "My family, they wanted to come, but they couldn't." His lower lip trembled, but he forced himself to continue. "We're poor, but I want them to hear me from home. I want them to be proud of me." The entire audience grew silent. Not a laugh, not a whisper, not a cough. Just a stillness so deep it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Amanda's eyes softened instantly, but Brian's face shifted in a different way. He wasn't emotional yet, but something about the boy's honesty had broken through his judge's armor. The backing track began to play, the soft intro of Hotel California echoing through the theater. The judges looked at one another, shocked. It was an unexpectedly difficult choice, a song even adults feared. A song that exposed weaknesses and demanded soul. Brian raised an eyebrow, clearly wondering if the boy even understood the challenge he was taking on. Eli closed his eyes. The moment he did, everything about him changed. His shoulders relaxed just a little, his breath steadied, and he lifted the microphone with a newfound sense of purpose. It was as if closing his eyes transport him somewhere else, somewhere far from the bright stage lights and the fancy auditorium. Somewhere back home to the narrow alleys of Cebu, where he used to sing outside small stores to earn coins for rice. And then he began. His voice was soft, almost fragile, but filled with something that instantly pulled everyone in. Not a performance voice, not a rehearsed sound, but the voice of someone who had lived through silence, hunger, and hope. His tone carried a weight that no vocal coach could teach. It carried the story of a child who had seen more than he should have. Amanda gasped softly, placing a hand over her mouth. Brian blinked twice, trying to hide the sudden sting in his eyes. The audience leaned forward, completely drawn to the boy's voice. He was no longer just a contestant. He was a child pouring out everything he had ever held inside. In those first few seconds, the poor Cebu boy made an entire theater forget its expectations. He didn't just sing, he connected, and the judges knew instantly that this performance would change something in all of them. As the soft beginning of Hotel California faded into the first verse, something remarkable happened. Eli's voice, which had started out gentle and uncertain, began to rise with a quiet confidence. It wasn't the confidence of someone trained or polished. It was the confidence of someone who had sung through struggle, someone who had learned to push through fear because life had never given him the option to stop. Each note carried the weight of long nights, empty plates, and dreams whispered into dim candlelight when electricity cut out in their small Cebu home. When he sang the line, "On a dark desert highway," his voice wrapped around the lyrics with the innocence of a child but the emotional depth of someone far older. The audience felt it immediately. A hush fell across the auditorium, like the air itself didn't want to disturb the moment. Amanda pressed a trembling hand against her chest while Brian leaned forward, elbows on the judge's table, unable to look away. He wasn't analyzing technique anymore. He was listening like a human being, not a judge. As Eli moved into the chorus, the room shifted. His voice cracked slightly, not from nerves but from raw emotion. The crack was like a small tear in a wall he had built around himself, and through it came everything he had never been able to say. The judges reacted instantly. Amanda's eyes glistened with fresh tears. She wiped them with the back of her hand, but more fell before she could stop them. She wasn't only hearing a song. She was hearing a child who had lived through enough pain to fill a lifetime. Brian, usually the strictest judge, looked shaken. He inhaled sharply, trying to keep himself composed. But when Eli reached the line, "You can check out any time you like," and his voice trembled with heartbreak, Brian's face changed. The mask of the tough critic slipped. His eyes softened, and he blinked repeatedly, struggling to hold back tears. He whispered under his breath, "Not for the cameras or the audience, but for himself. This kid, he's lived something real." The audience, once lively and expectant, became emotionally overwhelmed. People in different rows lifted their hands to their faces. Some cried silently, others clutched the shoulders of friends or family beside them. The impact was universal. No one stayed untouched by the boy's voice. Eli wasn't just singing the lyrics. He was telling a story of loneliness and longing. You could hear the echo of nights he sang himself to sleep, the memory of wishing life was kinder, the hope that music would somehow lift him out of poverty. When he held his final note in the chorus, stretching it longer than anyone expected, the sound cut straight through the heart of every person in the room. By the time he reached the end of the second verse, something magical had happened. The audience wasn't just watching a performance, they were witnessing a transformation. Eli, the poor boy from Cebu, was no longer just a contestant on Ireland's Got Talent. He was a voice the world wasn't ready for but desperately needed. And with each note, each breath, each trembling rise in his tone, the judges felt their hearts cracking open. They knew they were watching something rare, something unforgettable, something powerful enough to change the entire night. The final note of Eli's performance floated through the auditorium like a fragile piece of glass, shimmering and trembling in the air before settling into a deep, reverent silence. Not a single person moved. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, overflowing with shock, awe, and the kind of emotion that words never fully describe. Eli lowered the microphone slowly, his thin fingers shaking. He looked around with wide, nervous eyes, unsure of what he had just done. His chest rose and fell with quick breaths, the way a child breathes when they're trying not to cry. For a moment, he thought he had made a mistake. The silence felt too heavy, too long, too overwhelming. But then Amanda stood up. Her chair scraped back, her hands trembling as she pressed them together near her lips. Her eyes were red, wet, and overflowing with tears that had been building from the very first note. She took one step, then another, as if she couldn't stop herself. The entire room watched as she walked onto the stage, her heels clicking softly across the floor, until she stood right in front of the small boy who still looked like he didn't understand what had just happened. She knelt down to his height, her voice gentle, breaking. "Eli, sweetheart, you sang with your soul." She placed a hand over her heart. "You reached in here, and you broke something open. I felt every single second of that song." The audience erupted into applause, loud and emotional, as she gently wiped the tears off her face. Eli stared at her, stunned, unsure how to react. Tears began forming in his eyes too, not from sadness, but from something he had never felt before, acceptance. Back at the judges' table, Brian stood up slowly. His expression was unlike anything the audience had ever seen from him. His usually controlled face was now soft, vulnerable, and marked by the tear tracks glistening under the stage lights. He took a deep breath, but his voice still cracked when he tried to speak. "I'm supposed to be the tough judge," he said, shaking his head slightly in disbelief. "But kid, you broke me tonight." He placed both hands on his chest, as if holding himself together. "You didn't just sing Hotel California. You lived it. You told a story, your story, and none of us will forget it." Eli covered his mouth as emotion finally overwhelmed him. Tears spilled down his cheeks, and his shoulders shook with soft sobs. The audience began chanting his name, their voices rising like a wave. "Eli. Eli. Eli." And then, without warning, Brian reached out his hand, and slammed it down on the golden buzzer. A burst of gold confetti exploded into the air, shimmering like tiny stars falling around the boy. The audience screamed, applauded, cried. Amanda clapped her hands together, laughing through her tears. The other judges stood up, overwhelmed by the moment, while Brian looked up at the raining gold with watery eyes. Eli stood in the middle of it all. This small, poor boy from Cebu City, covered in golden light, crying softly as the world celebrated him. For the first time in his life, he felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like he mattered. And under that golden rain, he finally allowed himself to believe that he was enough.